So this week, Thursday specifically, is Suicide Awareness Day, and it's obviously it's something that's close to my heart. I've known people that have sort of committed suicide. It's always a really difficult subject to tackle, and I know something that's really getting pushed is to try and alleviate that stigma around talking about suicide. And obviously, in the world of addiction, it's a big topic. And I understand, Lester, that you've got a lot of experience when it comes to suicide. So if you'd like to share some of your thoughts on that, we'd really appreciate it.
Uh, yeah, I mean, suicide's, I think, something that's touched everybody's life, personally and professionally, and even personally, I was suicidal at one period of my life, and I don't think it's not a thought that does enter into my mind sometimes when I'm really sort of struggling still. But suicide's really just it's a devastating thing. It's a strange thing, and again, the younger the people that do it, the worse it kind of becomes. I remember when I was very young, probably about 10 years old, that four people committed suicide in our street in the same year, in like setting fire to themselves and gassing themselves in their car, and one hung himself. Uh, and I've known friends that committed suicide, um, and it kind of leaves you scratching your head and wondering why. And again, in my professional career and being in recovery, the suicide rate in recovery, I think it's at least double the normal population. Even in recovery, quite a few people over the years I've known have committed suicide. In when they end up going in prison, I think because that's so stressful, that becomes a double um, than the general population of suicides. And so, I notice that they come up with these theories of, especially men. I mean, it's shocking, the statistic that over 5,000 men under the age of 40 commit suicide in our country almost every year. I mean, that's just a shocking statistic. I think it's something like 14 a day. When you actually stop and think about it, that's somebody's, father, somebody's son, not just talking about men, somebody's daughters or mothers, or husband or friend. And often people say, I didn't even know. I mean, sometimes it seems, well, some people just seem determined to kill themselves, and there's not a lot you can do about it, and they eventually succeed. But other people, people would say, well, they don't know. So I think what's being promoted at the moment is that trying to get people, especially men, to talk about their feelings, which, again, I'm not so sure if that's the best advice for people in that situation. I don't think it's made much difference. I think they must have been talking about that for, let's say, 2 to 5 years, and I don't think it's actually made any difference on the suicide rate. So I'm guessing that philosophy, even though it makes sense, is not actually making much difference. So I'd guess that's probably not the best solution. Again, I'm just talking from my experience. I'm no expert in. I haven't seen all the statistics and reasons, but I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of them feel suicidal, and a lot of them haven't committed suicide. But I kind of sometimes think what's going on in society is a bit of a problem. That I'm almost been having thoughts of. I don't know whether it's always mental illness that makes people kill themselves. I know it might make sense to think that. I sometimes think people just don't want to live in this world, and I don't know whether that's a mental health decision, this world can be pretty difficult for some people. And I think, including myself, that when I've lived my life pre-recovery, I was like a tortured soul, emotionally and mentally, and the only place I really found solace was when I was in completely problem-free periods of my life, which didn't happen very often, or I was out my nut on drugs and alcohol. When you reach a point that the alcohol and the drugs are causing you more problems, becoming unbearable to even sustain, it leaves you in a bit of a dilemma, because by the age of 25 I'd sort of gone through enough of cycle of life to realise, to me at that point, my conclusion was life's shit. And that it was very difficult for me to live. And if somebody would have said, come share your feelings, I don't even know if I was capable of doing that then. I weren't around people that talked about their feelings. And, men generally don't like doing that. Now, again, I don't know whether that's... I don't think that's because there's something wrong with them. I think it's because they're men. Now, I know we're trying to get men to share their feelings more. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think that is hard for men, not necessarily because there's something wrong with them, because they're men. And I think men are a little bit more logical and less emotional. And that's why, they can go a little bit too far down that road and they find it difficult to share their feelings. So and again, if you get to the point of suicide, you're probably in a pretty vulnerable state anyway, and being asked to share your feelings, that may actually be adding to the problem, because they see that, and again, because even in my own lived experience, when I share my feelings of how uncomfortable I am, it doesn't always come out nice and pleasant, and when you're surrounded by other dysfunctional people, they can get a bit upset. They don't want to hear it. When I was a teenager and I felt so paranoid, probably because I was doing a lot of amphetamines at the time. And I remember going to my dad, who's very emotionally shut down, and saying, "Dad, I feel scared." And he said, "Stop being stupid." And I didn't get a lot better responses for anyone that I tried to talk to. And so telling people to talk to people, I think sometimes you've got to find the right people to talk to. Now, I don't think, they say even go to the GP, but I don't think he's necessarily the right person to talk to. I'm not saying don't talk to him, but my understanding of GPs is they're not psychotherapists or counsellors, they're doctors. And so they're more like pharmacists. So generally, if you go and talk to a doctor, you're probably going to get antidepressants, which I don't think's, antidepressants are not like medications that fix the problem. They're like painkillers that mask the problem. Now, they might send you to therapists. I don't know what the waiting lists are like. But I would probably preference saying to someone, go and talk about your feelings, because I think you can make it a lot worse. I think you can end up feeling incredibly vulnerable talking to the wrong person. I think I would definitely say go and try and find somebody professional to talk to, or even somebody that have a lived experience in support groups and things like that, online people that you can phone up like Samaritans and things, that generally people that have got a much better understanding of how you might be actually feeling in that situation. So I feel a little bit more comfortable trying to get people to talk about their problems than their feelings. I think it's a bit easier for people, especially men, to kind of try and get them to share their problems, which, you know, I learned myself is that when I started to learn to share my problems, I started to feel better. I don't always want to share my feelings because, one, you sometimes feel you're going to be arrested if you share them. It makes you very vulnerable, especially if they're not pleasant. And usually when I'm like that, I've not got pleasant feelings. But, you know, my problems were always my problems. So when I was 25 years old, I just had so many problems. I just couldn't see a way out. And I felt desperate pretty much on a daily basis. I just felt this massive feeling of desperation and impending doom. Still have that now. It's just very reduced down, very small. But I go through periods now where my problems in life, and again, you can't not have problems in life, but my problems in my life are quite large and uncomfortable. But I have this feeling when I can't really see that I've got anything to ultimately worry about in the short term, but I have this feeling of impending doom, which the world feels like that to me because there usually is some impending doom, especially in the society we're in at the minute. There usually is. It's like, what's going to be next? What are they going to do next? So having a feeling of impending doom, I don't think is a completely irrational emotion, to be honest. But when it's overwhelming, and when I was 25 and I'd come into recovery, but I couldn't see a way out of my problems because I'd been experiencing them all my life. And this one day, very early in the morning, I woke up full of anxiety, and it's crippling, Matt. I tell you that. I don't know whether you have that, but it is emotional torture. It's unbearable, and you can't escape it because there's nowhere you can go. It's like if there's a problem outside, you can often escape it for a little while, get some relief. But when it's inside you, and it's being perpetuated by your own mind, and you can't stop it, it's like being in a torture chamber. And the thing is, if on the outside people would go, "How are you?" and you'd go, "I'm fine." Nobody could even tell. And there's something in me that was like, do not show them there's something wrong with you, because that will be worse. And see, it was sitting in them AA meetings and learning how to share. See, that's the greatest thing that I learned about group therapies. That it's that, you know, and again, it was years before I actually went to therapy, but it was learning how to share. It was learning what my feelings were called, because I'd listen to someone speak and go, "I've got them feelings." Is that what they're called? See, if you would have asked me, and I could have told you what was wrong with you, I probably would have said, I'm afraid. But then I started to get attached with how angry I was, and how hurt I was, and quite rightly, and how let down I was, and you know, and then you start discovering endless emotional and mental disorders, persecution complexes, low self-esteem, inferiorities. It's endless in the mind of an alcoholic and addict. And they torture you. And what stops them in their tracks? Drugs and alcohol. Just for a moment, you get relief. And so at 25, for some reason, I'm just racked with anxiety. Racked. I'm completely feeling overwhelmed. Cannot escape these feelings. And something in my head said, kill yourself. And when I thought about it, this feeling overcome me. This feeling just wash, all of this pain and trauma just started leaving my body. And I started feeling better and better and better and better. And very shortly, I just felt this like ecstasy. It was like I felt completely free. And my head said, that's what suicide will give you. It'll set you free. And it makes absolute sense, doesn't it? It just made absolute sense. It seemed to be like the solution that I'd been looking for all of my life was suicide. Because all my problems would be gone. And that feeling wouldn't exist anymore. I could get out of this body. And spiritually speaking, that kind of makes sense. And like I was telling the other day, I went through this process that it was only I found myself standing on the edge of a pier that went way out to sea, and the high tide, and was going to jump in and drown myself, and a strange act of turn of fate snapped me out of that, and then I filled with fear again, and the fear drove me away from that moment. And again, so I've lived, the rest of my life that nearly didn't happen. That nearly didn't happen, and I think for me, I found a higher purpose, a purpose greater than myself. I found for me that, and again, I did learn to talk to people. It took time, but sitting in them meetings, speaking to them people that had gone through that process, I did learn what we call the language of the heart. I did learn how to talk about my feelings. I did learn how to express them. But that started really with sharing my problems and letting people help me resolve my problems, which started to give me relief. When I get problems, I just can get a lot of anxiety. And again, you can't live in this problem-free world, but finding a program and a solution that would help me keep on top of my emotional state. But I think an important element for me to that was finding a purpose in my life and, getting some more direction. But one of the other things that I realised that was quite a revelation to me about learning to share my problems and share my decisions with other people. And don't get me wrong, mate. Some people let you down, some people betray you. That's going to happen. Some people are going to, you're going to say, please don't say anything, and some of them possibly will, That not happened too much, but it has happened. But what I found was a great revelation to my life is when you grow up in a dysfunctional family of people that are emotionally unavailable because they're trauma themselves, is you're a very lonely person. And I think I grew up a very lonely person. And even though I was surrounded by people, I always felt lonely. And so I just started to feel more comfortable keeping myself to myself. And I still can do that to a degree. But learning to share my problems with other people, not everybody, just certain people that I felt comfortable with. And again, I did therapy, but I don't particularly like it, and I don't like talking to anybody that's just listening to my problems and not telling me theirs, because it makes me feel a bit vulnerable. I like friendships. And again, I learned that in Canada. They used to say good friends are cheaper than therapists. And so I found having friends that shared their problems with me and I shared my problems there, that was more of a comfortable relationship for me. But see, what started happening in that process was, and this was a real revelation, that as I was sharing, because we're talking about sharing our stories and sharing our experience, but that sharing my difficulties and my good things in my life with certain other people, one thing I noticed is my problems started to get less, for sure, and more manageable, and I'd get a lot more periods of feeling okay, but I started getting less lonely. And I realised that sharing my problems and asking other people for their opinion actually was building bridges and building relationships. And it was the key to my loneliness. So I've not got tons of people in my life that I have that relationship with, but I certainly need one or two of them. I certainly need one or two people like that in my life, and I've got to work at it, and I value them relationships because they help keep me out of that torturous emotional suffering. And so I hold them relationships very dear in my life. And honestly, if I didn't have them, and I didn't have a treatment program, at best I'd drink again, at worst I'd kill myself. I don't know if I could live in this world without getting relief from the emotional and mental torture. Is it spiritual? Is it psychological? I'd say spiritual, then psychological, then physical, and then unbearable. But that's my take on it, mate. It's a terrible thing that people see. Even saying that, I think, and I'd like to say it because it sounds good, but I think it's a bit disingenuous as well. That people say like suicide is a long-term solution for a short-term problem. But I don't know if that's true, because I still got the problem, but I've got a long-term solution, and it's a lot. I got a long-term solution for a long-term problem. Life is a long-term problem. As long as I'm alive, shit's happening, isn't it? And so I need something that can help me get through my life, and that's why I need a faith. That's why I need a program. Just taking away my medicine, well, no matter if it's self-medicated, just taking the drugs out of my life. To me, the drugs and alcohol were just a symptom. My problem is my reaction to life. Life can be torturous, and if I don't work on checking my responses, I need a program, and it's evolving. I'm 33 years, and what I was doing 10 years ago ain't working for me today. I got to do something else. Even like they say this, you need to become more patient the older you get, because you become less tolerant. And I think that's true. When your arthritis is playing up and you've been through the same shit 1,000 times and it won't stop, you start getting less tolerant. It can be harder getting older, and you start working out all the bullshit. And it starts bothering you, and I've got the government letting all these people dip into my bank account and take away all my money, which means I'm going to have to work harder and longer. And I've got to put up with it because there's nothing I can do, and the people that I've voted to protect me are not protecting me. They're letting it happen. Whether what I'm saying is right or wrong, that's how I feel, and it's terrible. And if I don't figure it out to reconcile that, I'm just living in a world of pain. So everyone around me. It's difficult. So
For sure.
that's my penny's worth anyway. Hope it helps someone.
Yeah, well, I think it will. Yeah, I really appreciate that. It just goes to show that it's not just talking to anyone. It's not just talking. It's having the right people to talk to. It's having that right support group around you. Whether that's one person, two people, your way of looking at things. And I think you're right. As men, it's you want to decompartmentalize everything. It's like you don't want problems. You want a to-do list. And if you can have somebody to talk to and help kind of get that thing down, then it perhaps can make it a bit more manageable.